Before we dive into techniques to add context to our visualization and see how to create a narrative around our data, I wanted to take a step back and first go over some approaches traditional journalism takes when creating its stories. Nate Silver of blog 538 fame, who correctly predicted all 50 states in the 2012 presidential election, describes approaches to journalism with the following spectrum in an opening post of the new relaunch of his blog. Nate sees journalism as neither wholly quantitative or qualitative. When talking about approaches to journalism, it's not a binary categorization to him. Rather than being either quantitative or qualitative, he sees it as more of a spectrum. Numbers without context is just as meaningless as words without numbers. And you need both to create effective data stories. And Nate actually goes one step farther and labels each of the quadrants. The upper left is where organizations like 538 stand that produce very rigorous and empirical articles based on some quantitative data. When talking about the upper right quadrant, I'm referring to the traditional articles that the Washington Post or the New York Times might put out that have extensive research backing the qualitative story they're trying to tell and narrative, but may not necessarily contain charts, interactive graphics, or some data collection or experiment they're testing. But as I mentioned earlier, the quantitative and qualitative divide isn't necessarily as black and white as I might have drawn it in this graphic, and organizations like the Washington Post and the New York Times do have very data-driven articles and interactive graphics, just like 538 might publish more qualitative articles in line with traditional journalism. The bottom of this chart, the bottom left and the bottom right quadrants, Nate doesn't think too highly of. The reason being that the bottom half of this graphic represents anecdotal and ad hoc stories. The bottom left here might represent sports writers or other journalists who take numbers and statistics out of context and don't have the rigorous research to back them and verify their facts. And finally, the bottom right quadrant is reserved for op-ed columnists and pundits who disseminate solely their opinions without any research, data, or hard facts to back up their claims. In this class, we will focus on the upper left quadrant and techniques that organizations like 538 take when writing their articles and crafting their narratives. In this lesson, we will try to create a compelling data narrative around the history of the World Cup using quantitative facts and data to support our claims to convey potentially some qualitative or subjective view of the World Cup. But before we go farther, I want to expand on this idea of the upper left quadrant of quantitative and rigorous analysis in the context not only of journalism, but how it ties into data science as a whole.